Some of you are carrying people God already released. And the weight isn't in your hands, it's in your heart. You're asking, why does it feel so heavy? Because you weren't meant to drag what God called you to draw. And the longer you hold on, the more it drains your joy, your peace, your purpose. Today I need to tell somebody, not everyone who started with you is assigned to stay with you. And if you keep holding on when God is saying let go, you're delaying what He's trying to deliver. Let me show you 3 clear signs it's time to release. You've been praying, God, show me a sign. And sometimes God doesn't whisper. Sometimes He shouts through the silence. 3 signs, 3 clear signs that it's time to let go. There comes a moment in every journey when what used to feel light begins to feel heavy. You remember when it started? The connection, the relationship, the partnership. At first it felt easy. It gave you energy. It propelled you forward. But somewhere along the way, the same thing that once helped you move now feels like it's holding you down. It's not that you stopped walking. It's not that you stopped believing. It's that the weight you're carrying no longer matches the walk you're on. Picture a runner training for a race. At the beginning, the coach straps a weighted vest around their chest. The vest isn't punishment, it's resistance. It's meant to build strength. For a season, it serves a purpose. But imagine that same runner showing up to the actual race still wearing the vest. What was once preparation has now become limitation. What once built you will now break you if you refuse to release it. Some of you are carrying relationships, expectations, even old versions of yourself, like that runner with the vest, trying to run forward while dragging yesterday. You keep wondering why you feel drained, why the joy you used to have feels distant, why your spirit feels heavy. It's not because you're broken, it's because you're burdened with weight. God never meant you to carry this far. Jesus said in Matthew 11:30, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." Did you hear that? Light. That doesn't mean life will be effortless. That doesn't mean you won't face trials, but it does mean that what He calls you to carry will not crush your spirit. And if it's crushing you, maybe it's not His assignment anymore. I think about Israel wandering through the wilderness. God provided manna, daily bread for their journey. It was exactly what they needed. But when they tried to hoard it, when they tried to carry yesterday's portion into tomorrow, it spoiled. Why? Because it wasn't meant for the next step. And isn't that what so many of us do? We keep holding on to people, patterns, and seasons that were manna for yesterday, not for today. And then we wonder why it doesn't taste right anymore, why it doesn't fill us the way it used to. The weight no longer matches the walk. Let me get practical. Sometimes the weight looks like loyalty. You keep telling yourself, I owe it to them to stay. I owe it to them to keep carrying this. But loyalty without alignment leads to exhaustion. God never asked you to prove your faithfulness by forfeiting your future. Other times the weight looks like fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Fear of what people will think if you finally put it down. But can I tell you something? The fear of release will always feel bigger than the reality of freedom. Because the moment you set it down, you realize you were stronger without it. And I know what somebody's thinking. But Pastor, if I put it down, won't I lose them? Won't I lose the history we built? Won't I lose the comfort I've known? Yes, you might lose what, but you'll gain what's next. You'll gain clarity. You'll gain energy. You'll gain the ability to walk again without dragging dead weight behind you. And isn't that worth more than clinging to what's already decaying? Here's the truth. You cannot keep holding on to what God has released and expect to walk into what God has promised. The weight of yesterday will always fight against the walk of tomorrow. And some of you are living proof. You've been trying to reconcile the two. You're trying to walk by faith, but dragged by fear. You're trying to walk in peace, but drag dysfunction. You're trying to walk in purpose, but drag someone who refuses to grow. And you wonder why every step feels like a struggle. Listen to me. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you're failing. It's simply that the weight no longer matches the walk. And maybe God is inviting you to trust Him enough to travel lighter, because there's an assignment waiting on the other side of your release. There's joy waiting on the other side of your surrender. There's peace that will return the moment you put it down. Think about David. He was a shepherd before he was a king. And as a shepherd, he carried a staff and a sling. But when he stepped into the palace, he couldn't carry the same tool. Not because they were bad, but because they weren't built for where he was going. If David insisted on dragging every tool from every season into the next, he would have never been ready to pick up the crown. And the same is true for you. You can't hold on to everything from yesterday and expect to walk freely into tomorrow. So let me ask you, what weight are you dragging that no longer matches your walk? What relationship, what habit, what old version of yourself are you still carrying out of loyalty, out of fear, out of guilt? And how long are you willing to let it keep slowing you down? Because here's the good news, you don't have to keep dragging it. You don't have to keep pretending it still fits. You don't have to keep apologizing for outgrowing it. Growth always creates weight shift. When you grow taller, the clothes that once fit feel tight. When you grow stronger, the weights that once challenged you feel light. When you grow spiritually, the connections that once seemed necessary now feel unnecessary. That's not rejection, that's progression. That's God saying, it's time for you to walk with what matches your maturity. So stop dragging what no longer belongs. Stop calling it loyalty when it's really limitation. Stop convincing yourself it's strength when it's really suffocation. The weight no longer matches the walk, and God is calling you to drop it, not because it never mattered, but because it no longer matches the pace He set for your future. And when you finally put it down, oh, the freedom you'll feel, oh, the clarity that will come rushing back, oh, the strength you'll discover that was buried under the heaviness. You'll realize that you weren't breaking, you were just burdened. And the moment you let go, the walk becomes lighter, the path becomes clearer, and your spirit finally breathes again. The weight no longer matches the walk. And maybe, just maybe, the next step God has for you depends on your willingness to lay it down. There is a moment when you realize something has shifted. You can't always explain it. You can't always put your finger on the exact day it happened, but you know it, you feel it. Because every time you step into the space, every time you replay the conversation, every time you try to make it work, peace is gone. It's as if peace packed up its bags, walked out the door and left you in a house that no longer feels like home. Peace is more than a feeling. Peace is a presence. It's the very breath of God that settles your heart when chaos surrounds you. The Bible calls Him the Prince of Peace. That means when peace leaves the room, it's not just your emotions being disturbed, it's your spirit being alert. It's God saying something here is out of order. Something here is no longer aligned with where I'm taking you. Think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where on the outside everything looked fine, but on the inside you couldn't rest? You smiled for the picture, you laughed at the jokes, you showed up and went through the motions, but as soon as you got alone, your chest felt tight, your mind felt crowded, your soul felt restless. That's not coincidence, that's not weakness, that's the absence of peace. And here's the truth we don't like to admit. When peace leaves, it rarely slams the door. It usually slips out quietly. At first you don't even notice. You keep telling yourself, it's just a season, it's just a rough patch, it's just stress. But days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and before you know it, you've normalized living without peace. You've adjusted to dysfunction like it's supposed to be the default. But can I tell you, chaos is not your calling. Anxiety is not your assignment. God did not create you to live in perpetual unrest. The Apostle Paul wrote, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." Rule. That means peace is not optional. It's not an accessory. It's the umpire of your spirit. It makes the call. It tells you when something is safe, and it tells you when something is out. And if peace has been waving its arms and shouting out, but you keep trying to play the game anyway, don't be surprised when exhaustion becomes your new normal. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine walking into a room full of people. The moment you step inside, you can't quite explain why, but something feels off. Nobody said anything wrong. Nobody even moved toward you. But your spirit knows. The atmosphere shifted. Peace is not there. And the longer you stand in that room, the heavier you feel. That's what happens in life. You can fake smiles. You can plaster words of encouragement over the cracks. But you can't fake peace. When it's gone, your spirit knows. And I know how we justify it. Well, I can handle it. I'll just pray harder. I'll just endure it. God wants me to be strong. No, strength is not measured by how much chaos you can tolerate. Strength is measured by how quickly you recognize that peace is a gift too precious to surrender. Because if the Prince of Peace lives in you, why are you settling for constant unrest around you? Let me take you back to the boat with the disciples in the storm. The waves were crashing, the wind was howling, and Jesus was asleep. They panicked. They thought it was over. But Jesus stood up, spoke one word, peace, and the storm obeyed. Listen, peace is not the absence of storm. Peace is the authority of God in the middle of the storm. And when you have His peace, you can stand in the same boat, face the same winds, hear the same thunder, and not be moved. But when peace leaves, every ripple feels like a tidal wave. Every whisper feels like a shout. Every small conflict feels like catastrophe. That's why this is so important. Because when peace leaves the room, your vision starts to blur. You can't hear God clearly, because all you hear is noise. You can't move forward boldly, because you're too busy trying to survive the tension. And you start making decisions not from a place of wisdom, but from a place of weariness. That's dangerous, because weary decisions rarely lead to fruitful destination. So here's the hard but freeing truth. If peace consistently leaves every time you step into that situation, that relationship, that environment, maybe God is showing you it's not for you. God will never call you to a connection that consistently cost you the very peace He died to give you. That's not sacrifice, that's sabotage. But here's the good news. Peace can return. Peace can re-enter. Because peace is not tied to them. Peace is not tied to circumstances. Peace is tied to Him. And when you finally release what's draining you, when you finally stop chasing what's disturbing you, peace comes rushing back like oxygen into lungs that were starved. Suddenly you can breathe again. Suddenly the laughter is real again. Suddenly your soul feels settled again. And isn't that what you've been craving? Not just relief but rest. Not just quiet but peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything being perfect, but the unshakable peace that comes from knowing, God, I trust you enough to let go of what steals my peace, because I believe you are my peace. So let me ask you, has peace left the room? Have you been ignoring the sign? Have you been convincing yourself to stay when God's Spirit is saying go? If the answer is yes, then maybe it's time to make the hardest but holiest decision of your life, to choose peace over pressure, peace over people-pleasing, peace over pretend. Because when peace returns, clarity comes with it. Confidence comes with it, joy comes with it, and you'll look back one day and realize, losing them wasn't losing at all. It was the moment you stopped losing yourself. Peace is the presence of God. Don't settle for a room He's already walked out of. There is nothing more frustrating than knowing you were made for more, but feeling like you can't see it anymore. Have you ever been there? You start with clarity, you start with conviction, you start with passion burning in your bones, but then, somewhere along the way, the vision that was once sharp turns foggy. What once felt so obvious now feels confusing. What once fueled you now drains you. That's what happens when purpose gets blurred. Purpose doesn't usually disappear all at once. It fades slowly, like fog rolling in over a road you've been driving for years. At first you can still see the signs, you can still recognize the landmarks, but little by little the haze thickens. And before long you find yourself gripping the wheel tighter, squinting your eyes, second-guessing if you're even on the right path anymore. That's what happens when you stay too long in a place, or with a person, or in a pattern that no longer matches the assignment God has for you. The enemy doesn't have to destroy your destiny. He just has to distort your vision. He doesn't need to block your calling. He just needs to blur your focus. Because if he can keep you confused, if he can keep you distracted, if he can keep you doubting, he doesn't have to chain you'll chain yourself. Think about Samson, called from birth, anointed with strength that could topple armies. But little by little, compromise blurred his clarity. He was still powerful, but he was distracted. He was still chosen, but he was careless. And the saddest moment wasn't when he lost his strength. It was when he lost his sight. Because when you can't see, you can't step. And when purpose gets blurred, you end up stumbling through life, instead of walking with confidence. I wonder how many of us are stumbling right now. Not because God hasn't given us purpose, not because He hasn't made His will clear at some point, but because we've allowed voices, relationships, and distractions to fog the lens of our spirit. You started out with passion, you started out with purity, but now you're living in compromise. Now you're chasing validation instead of vision. Now you're exhausted, not because you don't have a calling, but because you've lost sight of it. And here's the dangerous thing. Blurred purpose creates misplaced energy. You're busy, but not fruitful. You're active, but not effective. You're running, but in circles. And isn't that exactly what the enemy wants? To keep you moving, but not advancing. To keep you striving, but never thriving. To keep you distracted, so you never discover what God put in you from the beginning. Think about Peter walking on the water. As long as his eyes were fixed on Jesus, his steps were secure. The waves didn't matter. The wind didn't matter. The storm didn't matter. But the moment his focus shifted, the moment his vision blurred, he began to sink. Purpose doesn't sink because the storm gets stronger. Purpose sinks because focus gets weaker. And maybe that's what's been happening to you. You've been so focused on pleasing people that you've lost sight of pursuing purpose. You've been so busy holding on to someone else that you forgot to hold on to the vision God placed inside of you. You've been so consumed with what you might lose, you've stopped considering what you're destined to become. But let me remind you of something. God's purpose for you is not fragile. It doesn't disappear just because you got distracted. It doesn't vanish just because you blurred the line. The gifts and the callings of God are without repentance. That means your purpose is still intact, even if your perspective in the enemy may blur your vision, but he can't erase your assignment. The good news is that God specializes in clearing fog. Remember the blind man in Mark? Jesus spit in his eyes and asked him, "Do you see anything?" The man said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking around." In other words, "I see, but it's blurred." And Jesus touched him again, and this time his sight was restored and he saw clearly. That's what God wants to do for you. Maybe you've been living with blurred purpose. You can see a little, but it's fuzzy. You've got an idea but not clarity. You've got passion, but no direction. And God is saying, "Let me touch it again. Let me restore your focus. Let me clear the fog that's been clouding your vision." Because he doesn't just want you to move. He wants you to move with precision. He doesn't just want you to live. He wants you to live on purpose. And this is where letting go comes in. Because some of the very things you're clutching so tightly are the same things blurring your sight. You're asking God for clarity, but refusing to release what clouds your vision. You want focus, but you're holding on to distraction. You want direction, but you're tied to detour. No wonder you can't see straight. When purpose gets blurred, you've got two choices: stay in the fog and keep stumbling, or trust God enough to step out of it. Trust Him enough to say, "Lord, if this is costing me clarity, I'll release it. If this is dimming my vision, I'll lay it down. If this is blurring who you've called me to be, I'd rather lose it than lose myself." Because here's the truth: clear vision brings peace. Clear vision brings confidence. Clear vision brings courage. When you see who you are and where you're going, you stop living at the mercy of distraction. You stop begging for approval from people who can't even see themselves clearly. You stop pouring energy into cycles that don't match your assignment. And you start walking, not stumbling, but walking with boldness into the future God designed for you. So let me ask you, has your purpose been blurred? Have you been squinting through fog, trying to make sense of where you're going? If so, maybe this is not the season to work harder, but to release faster, not to strive more, but to surrender deeper. Because the moment you let go of what blurs you is the moment you step back into the clarity of who God made you to be. Purpose is too precious to live blurred. Don't waste your life stumbling in circles when God called you to walk with vision. Have you ever noticed how life has a way of circling back? How you find yourself in the same kind of conflict, the same kind of relationship, the same kind of struggle, over and over again. It feels like deja vu. You pray for change, you cry for breakthrough, but when the dust settles, you're standing in the same spot, facing the same test, and you start asking yourself, why does this keep happening to me? Why am I stuck in this cycle? Let me tell you why. Because God keeps repeating the same lesson until you finally learn what He's been trying to teach you. Not because He's cruel, not because He's punishing you, but because He loves you too much to let you move forward without the wisdom you'll need for what's ahead. Think about it. In school, when you fail a test, the teacher doesn't just pass you to the next grade out of pity. No, you retake it, not to embarrass you, not to keep you behind, but because without that knowledge, you won't be ready for the next level. The repetition isn't rejection, it's preparation. And some of you are mistaking God's repetition as punishment, when in reality, it's protection. Israel knew this firsthand.
They wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, circling the same mountains, seeing the same scenery, fighting the same battles. Why? Because every time God tried to teach them to trust Him, they went back to grumbling. Every time He tried to teach them faith, they defaulted to fear. So the cycle repeated, not because God wasn't able to deliver them, but because they weren't willing to learn the lesson. And some of you feel stuck, not because God doesn't have more for you, but because you haven't surrendered to the lesson He's been repeating in your life. Let's be real, repeated lessons are uncomfortable. They test your patience, they test your pride, they test your willingness to listen. But what if the very thing you're frustrated by is the very thing God is using to form you? What if the cycle you keep trying to escape is actually the classroom God keeps inviting you back into? For some, the repeated lesson is about boundaries. You keep attracting the same kind of people, the same kind of chaos, the same kind of heartbreak, and God is whispering, when will you learn that you can't save them at the expense of yourself? When will you stop confusing rescue with relationship? For others, the repeated lesson is about trust. You say you trust God, but every time money gets tight, every time plans shift, every time the outcome looks uncertain, fear takes over. So God allows the situation to circle back again, not to torment you, but to teach you that your faith can't just live in your mouth, it has to live in your heart. And maybe the lesson is about identity. Maybe God keeps allowing you to face rejection, because He wants you to stop anchoring your worth in the acceptance of people. He's saying, until you learn that your value comes from me, and not them, you're going to keep circling back to the same disappointment. Here's the truth, cycles don't break until lessons are learned. And God loves you too much to let you graduate without growth. That's why some doors keep closing. That's why some relationships keep ending the same way. That's why some prayers feel unanswered. Because He's saying, I can't take you into the promised land until you've let go of the wilderness mentality. I can't trust you with more if you keep mishandling what you already have. I can't bless you with bigger if you keep repeating smaller mistakes. And yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's tiring. Yes, it feels like you're stuck. But let me encourage you, if God is repeating the lesson, it means He still has a plan for you. If He wanted to give up on you, He would have let you drift. But the fact that you're circling means He's still committed to your growth. He's still invested in your future. He's still preparing you for something greater. Think about Jonah. God told him, go to Nineveh. Jonah ran in the opposite direction. God didn't cancel Jonah's assignment. He just repeated the lesson. Jonah ended up in the belly of a fish. But when he came out, the command was the same. Go to Nineveh. Different scenery, same lesson. Because until Jonah surrendered, cycle wasn't going to end. And isn't that what God does with us? Different scenery, different year, same struggle, different face, same heartbreak. Not because He's trying to break us, but because He's trying to build us. And He knows that if we don't get the foundation right, the weight of the future will crush us. So the question is not, why does this keep happening to me? The question is, what is God trying to teach me in this? What is He showing me about myself? What is He showing me about Him? What is He trying to uproot, to refine, to heal, to strengthen? Because once you learn the lesson, the cycle loses its power. Let me encourage you, you don't have to keep circling forever. Israel eventually entered the promised land. Jonah eventually fulfilled his mission. The disciples eventually learned to trust Jesus, and you too can graduate from this cycle. But it won't happen by running. It won't happen by resisting. It happens by recognizing, God, if you keep bringing me back here, then there's something here I need to learn. And this time I won't fight it. I'll face it. Because the moment you learn the lesson is the moment the cycle breaks. The moment you stop resisting is the moment the wilderness gives way to promise. And when you finally surrender, you'll look back and realize, what felt like punishment was really preparation. What felt like delay was really development. What felt like God holding you back was actually God getting you ready. God keeps repeating the same lesson because He refuses to let you walk into your future unprepared. And that's not rejection, that's love. When God keeps repeating the same lesson, it's not punishment, it's preparation. Cycles are classrooms, not cages. The moment you stop resisting and start receiving, clarity comes, growth begins, and freedom follows. Learn the lesson, break the cycle, and step boldly into the future God already designed for you.